The following is part 4 of our 5-part deep dive into the end-to-end history of the Forgotten Realms, detailing the very first spark of Netheril to the modern-day 5th edition of Faerûn. If you missed any or all of the previous 3 parts, I have links to each pinned in the comments below, and by popular request, a single extended supercut including all 5 parts will be made available shortly after Part 5 has been released. We have thus far progressed past the world to Genesis, the wars of gods, titans, dragons, and even the elven atrocities that gave rise to the Dark Elf Drow people. Today we step into the dawn of man, perhaps the most intimate and personal to all within the sound of my voice. Our prehistoric ancestors have now abandoned their animal skins, crude tools, and marvel at the discovery of fire, emerging from their caves to start the Age of Humanity. As the blood-hazed tragedies of the Crown Wars came to a close, the steel grip of control over the realms had loosened, welcoming a new wave of humanoid upstarts to test their fate at realm dominance. The stout folk, driven from their great rift city of Beharenden at the hands of the Drow, delved deep into the mountains of the north and west to carve out the mighty subterranean kingdom of Xanatar, while the elves, weary from 3 millennia of civil war, began the slow process of building a new and isolated forest or migrating to their new island sanctuary of Evermeet, each proving to be fertile soil for new powers to rise. This was the Age of Humanity, a sprawling epoch where for the first time emergent human civilizations found the room to breathe, build, and find their own place upon the lands. The first act of this era, often called the Founding Time, spanned roughly 6,000 years, from -9,000 to -3,000, and is where we find the establishment of 4 great human empires of Faerûn. There are certainly more than just the 4 kingdoms I will profile today. Faerûn's history is littered with the corpses of ambitious and overreaching human empires, so many that we must, for the sake of the ever-growing word count of this treatise, give a few the historical cold shoulder without ignoring them completely. Take the empires of Narfell and Ramathar in the frigid north, one a savage kingdom of demon binders north and east of the Sea of Fallen Stars, the other an empire of sword and spell-slinging battle wizards from the lands that would later become the nation of Thay and their famed Red Wizards. 2 kingdoms, bitter rivals and all-out war. In a shocking twist I'm sure no one saw coming, they annihilated each other in a magical apocalypse of sorcery and summoned fiends. Millennia later, the South saw the Shun Imperium enjoy a 400-year highlight reel of necromancy and brutal conquest before it too collapsed under the sheer weight of its own undead villainy. Each of these kingdoms certainly deserve more coverage than the 90 seconds I just gave them, and truth be told, my lore OCD and I fought longer than it would have taken to just write another 10 minutes of history, but the lore must go on. However, if there is a particular empire you'd like to see get equal airtime, be sure to let me know in the comments. Nonetheless, while their stories are worthy cautionary tales, they are but the opening acts for the true stars of humanity, empires whose rise and fall would not just take up chapters in the chronicles of history, but redefine the very realms. The first and oldest of these began far to the east, circa -8350, in the fertile basin of Rauren, where a Dupari splinter tribe of humans would lay the first stone blocks of what would become the Imaskar Empire. Founded as a magocracy renowned for its advanced magical knowledge, especially in planar and extra-dimensional magic, their wizard artificers and autocratic rule were marked by aggressive expansion, isolationist views, and most infamous, their enslavement of tens of thousands of human and humanoid races abducted from outside planes and worlds. From their capital and seat of power in Anupras resided the Palace of the Purple Emperor, where the Lord Artificer of Imaskar oversaw the Empire's control of vast territories, stretching from the Great Ice Sea to Karatur. Reinforcing the Imaskari isolationist ideology, manifesting as a distrust and disdain for any religious dogma, they erected planar walls to mute foreign gods, bred constructs to enforce silence, and generally basked in their own arrogance and oppression until the deities of those imprisoned would smash through the Imaskari gates. These enslaved people came to be collectively known as the Mulan. Despite the planar barriers and isolation, the Mulan prayers would eventually breach the Imaskari barriers. In -2489, celestial avatars descended upon the God's Watch peaks. Within a year, the Lord Artificer was slain, Imaskar Jade Towers had collapsed to ruin, and the Empire's great seat of power in Upros was leveled to rubble. The newly freed Mulan, guided by their manifest gods, trekked south along the shores of the Alambir River to carve new kingdoms from Imaskar's corpse. They would raise sandstone temples to their liberator gods such as Horus, and plant the seeds that would form the basis of the Malharandai and Unthoric cultures of Faerûn. Beneath the fractured mantle of Imaskar, as the surface empire crumbled to dust, a splinter of its less-than-noble refugees who did survive the fall would retreat into the Underdark, founding the hidden city of Deep Imaskar in negative 2481 Dale Reckoning. And there it endures, a clandestine echo of hubris and ingenuity, quietly flourishing in exile, proof that in these realms few things truly perish. Old powers simply outwit the ruin, trading sunlight for secrecy, plotting their return in the depths. While the kingdoms of Imaskar dominated the east, another power was rising in the west. Calimshan's history begins in negative 7800 Dale Reckoning, founded by a large group of jinn who arrived from the elemental plane of air, along with their servants and slaves, settling the lands surrounding present-day Kalimport. Their kingdom would endure external threats from dragonflights and Marid water genies for nearly 2 millennia before the arrival of the Ifrit Memnon and his own legion of fire genies. This elemental rivalry of air and fire would rage across the region for 4 centuries in a conflict that history would later call the Era of Skyfire, the ceaseless destruction of the battles scorching the lands, creating the barren Calim Desert. The I Dream of Genie wars would only end in negative 6100, when powerful elven high magic imprisoned both genie lords into a gem fittingly called the Calimemnon Crystal. For thousands of years, Calimshan's history was one of dynastic strife, wars with beholders from the Alamir Mountains, and long brutal conflicts against the dwarves of Shanatar, while the nation also endured internal strife, assassinations, and the deaths, or lichdom as the lore often suggests, of its powerful rulers, such as the infamous Kaiser Shun VII. With each hit, the Empire saw fractures in their central authority, slave revolts, city-state rivalries, and the resurging genie magic layering fresh turmoil atop old wounds. Despite the repeated devastation, however, Calimshan persisted, its cities rebuilt and its mercantile traditions proving as resilient as its people. Over time, the harshest elements faded, and Calimshan's cosmopolitan cities grew into crossroads of language, wealth, and culture. Today, Calimshan stands as a monument to that resilience, a nation that wears the scars of genie pride and centuries of endured threats, while its vibrant bazaars and robust trade prove that luxury, commerce, and secrets remain its heartbeat. Calimshan, eternal, ever changed, but never conquered. To the north of Calimshan, a different kind of power would emerge. In negative 5800, the 12 cities of Jhaamdath were founded, a confederation that is notable as Faerûn's first and only psiocracy. Ruled by psionic blade lords, Jhaamdath expanded its influence through mental might as much as steel. However, it was their xenophobia and aggression that would earn the scorn of the elves of the Condalwood. Their ruthless expansionism first leveling entire forests, followed by open slaughter of any elves who dared protest or oppose their careless progression. Desperate in the face of annihilation, the elves of the region turned to, you guessed it, elven high magic to rid themselves of their psionicist oppressors. And their call would be answered in negative 255 Dale Reckoning, as elven high mages called forth a colossal wave, and just like that, the 12 cities of Sword were wiped from the map, transforming Jhaamdath Bay into the Vilhan Reach. Those survivors who did not meet their watery grave that day would migrate to lands north and east of the Sea of Fallen Stars, including the unapproachable east, eventually settling in Thesk to found the kingdom of Impultur, carrying on a fraction of Jhaamdath's legacy to this day. Of all the human empires that have spectacularly face-planted across Faerûn's history, none did it with more style and hubris than Netheril. It all began rather humbly in negative 3859 with the alliance of Seventon, a confederation of 7 human villages consisting mainly of fishermen and farmers located in North Faerûn, just south of the Narrow Sea, an ancient body of water you will not find on any modern maps of Faerûn, as the sea would transform in the centuries to come, becoming the frozen wastelands of the high ice. However, these commoners would not remain backwater fishmongers and sustenance farmers for very long. The discovery of the Nether Scrolls found amid the ruins of the ancient elven kingdoms of Aravandar only years later would catapult the meager civilizations into an age of unparalleled arcane enlightenment. The neighboring elves of Arelon in the nearby Delambir Vale tried to play mentor, attempting to teach the Netherese proper discipline and restraint in using what were essentially universal cheat codes for arcane magic. The Netherese listened politely, then the Archmage Iolon promptly used the scroll's knowledge to haphazardly rip colossal chunks of rock from the planet in an early sign of things to come. The soon-to-be Netherese Archwizard would go on to create a mythalar that allowed the upstart civilization to lift and suspend entire cities into the air. The elves, predictably, were not pleased. Such rapid arcane advancement would soon see the skies cluttered with as many as 25 of these sky enclaves. From the great trade hub of Naloth to the inverted mountain peak of Sakors, each became the arcane real estate of the 1%. And it would be on one of these floating enclaves, the city of Eilenar, that a young wizard named Karsus stared at all the Netherese had achieved and thought to himself, yes, but what if one day I just broke everything? Soon, the burgeoning empire would see the formation of a stark class divide. The high Netheril magicratic nobility sipping enchanted wines in the clouds, while low Netheril was forced to dodge the falling refuse from above, landing on the decaying terrain below. You see, while the arch-wizards were busy with their supernatural-fueled gentrification, a cancer was growing beneath their soil. From the Underdark below, subterranean, powerful, arcane-empowered creatures called the Faerûn had insidiously begun draining the life from Netheril lands, slowly turning the fertile heartland into what would become the Anauroch Desert. The folks in Low Netheril noticed, but no one listened. The newly anointed wizard kings, drunk on their magical prowess, were too busy arguing over whose floating island had better curb appeal. The Empire's final, literal plummeting doom would arrive in -339, courtesy of the most infamous of these Netherese magi, a wannabe god wizard named Karsus. Not satisfied with the many blessings of fortune bestowed upon his people, Karsus would look upon the goddess of magic, one named Mistral in this age, and thought that he too was worthy of such divinity. So, in an act of grand arrogance that still makes sages and wizards cringe to this very day, Karsus would spend a decade of research to create a new spell of such complexity that the components alone would require nearly 10 years just to acquire. Although the original formula has never been found, just some of the required raw materials include the gizzard of a gold dragon, bile from a 12-headed hydra, and the blood of a Taras. The meticulous, decade-long craft would result in a spell of such power it required a ritual cast time of 6 hours. It was humbly called the Avatar of Karsus, and it was designed to steal the power of a god. There exist only slightly more charitable texts which take a more forgiving stance, suggesting Karsus may have thought the spell capable of granting him a new divinity of his choosing. However, most scholars agree that such a distinction would have mattered little in light of what history paints as perhaps the single most power-hungry human wizard in all of Realms lore. Regardless, the Arch-Wizard would cast his self-titled spell, and for one terrifying moment, it actually worked. The problem? Karsus had the magical equivalent of a learner's permit and had just hot-wired a cosmic supercar. The weave that supports magic across all of Toril quickly began to unravel. Realizing the looming destruction, the goddess of magic quickly sacrificed herself to reboot a quickly distorting reality from blue screening. This selfless act overloaded the weave and broke the link to Karsus, destroying herself in the process to briefly stabilize the faltering weave, hitting the off switch for all of magic across the Forgotten Realms. The lights went out, the mythalars failed, and what of those 25 sky cities of the rich and famous? They fell to the earth like, well, rocks. They fell like rocks. And in the absence of the magic that suspended them above, they did what all rocks on Toril do. They crashed like comets upon the earth below. That is, all but 4 of them. The fallout left the Netherese Empire in ruin, its legacy fragmented across Faerûn like shrapnel from a cosmic nuke. However, while most of High Netheril's floating nobility became a fine paste on the landscape below, the lore tells us the goddess of magic, now in her 2.0 form as Mystra, reincarnated in just enough time to catch 3 of the falling sky enclaves: Honoria, Osram, and Alondath. 3 of the 25 flying cities that had started their descent from the greatest heights. These surviving city-states flickered on for a few centuries more before meeting their own end from orc hordes, evil pacts, and the hostile desert. The 4th enclave, Tultanthar, was able to muster their fading magics to avoid their plummeting fate, shifting their city into the Plane of Shadow, where it would vanish for almost a millennia until making its return as the City of Shade in the 4th edition lore. As for the commoners of Low Netheril, those not crushed beneath the falling cities or its fallout scattered to the winds, many would establish bloodlines with the many barbarian hordes of the region, namely among the savage peoples of the Angart, Rengarth, and Uthgart tribes. Still other refugees would flee west, becoming the founders of communities such as Ilusk, known today as Luskan. And finally, and most notably, we must mention the prescient wizards of Halrua. Having predicted such a disaster long ago, they had packed up and moved south long before this calamitous end, and were quick to tell any that would listen, "Hey, we told you so." In the aftermath of rubble and ruins, the reborn Mystra would implement new arcane safety regulations, starting with the banhammer on any spells above 9th level for mortals. That's right, the event history books would forever call Karsus Folly was so catastrophic, his actions caused a perma-ban on epic tier magic. So the next time you get frustrated that your 9th level fireball only did 14d6 damage, you can blame Karsus, the foolish wizard who thought himself a god. And that concludes part 4 of our 5-part dive into the full history of Realms lore. As we enter the modern era of these Forgotten Realms, our final part 5 is easily the most controversial. From the fall and resurrection of gods to fractured lands and timelines, all caused by a plague of blue fire and retcon. It is a finale that is as fitting as it is frustrating. If you enjoy this type of content and want to see more, please consider taking those few seconds to like, subscribe, and enable notifications. And if you really want to champion smaller channels that provide the content you enjoy, the YouTube Hype feature is a powerful tool to do so. And finally, last but certainly not least, a sincere thank you to my patrons and channel members who make this content possible. Thanks for watching or listening. Let's do it again real soon. Until then, take care, my friends.